Officers arrived at the Spraying mansion, unsure of what to anticipate, but prepared for the worst after a silent alarm was set off at the Snowden house, one of Memphis's most historic family estates. They entered a setting that seemed too familiar. A few houses down, a similar vicious crime had devastated this same family decades earlier. At first, the connection seemed impossible, almost too straining to be true. But the more investigators dug, the more they discovered that the tragedy was even harder to understand. Blood on the floor, a body near the grand staircase, and an assailant fleeing the wealthy family's home. The link between the past and present became horrific, not just real, forcing friends and family to deal with the harsh irony of how kindness could turn into something so destructive. Today, we'll discuss the sad events involving Martha McKay, who belonged to one of the most well-known families in Memphis. We'll explore how two violent crimes that closely mirrored one another over decades grew even more. Join us as we unraveled a case that devastated a legacy and left behind questions that continue to this day, unthinkable given who was involved. The legacy and riches of Martha McKay's family ran deep. After coming home to Memphis, Tennessee, her great-grandfather, Colonel Robert Snowden, a Confederate Civil War soldier, started building the family's fortune by acquiring properties and land and engaging in profitable commercial endeavors. Both families benefited from the Caramels' marriage to Anne over tenant Brinkley. Robert Campbell Brinkley, a railroad and real estate tycoon who built the Peabody Hotel and portions of downtown Memphis, was Anne's father. Her father also helped build the Memphis to Little Rock Railroad, which fueled regional growth and gave the town of Brinkley, Arkansas, its name. The family's wealth and power grew over the generations, and by the early 1900s, their grandson, Robert Brinkley Snowden, and his wife Grace had amassed 1,000 acres of land along serene Horseshoe Lake, Arkansas. The lake was a picturesque setting, about 30 miles from Memphis, and it was on this lake that Robert and Grace built their home, the Snowden house. During their stay there, the house was transformed from mud into an impressive 6,000-foot mansion with marble floors and a grand staircase, making it the crown jewel of the family's legacy. At first, the house was used as a family retreat where they would have extravagant weddings, summer get-togethers, and family festivities. The family also owned additional homes on Millennium Lake. After surviving many unsuccessful marriages, Robert entrusted one of his daughters, Sally, to manage the estate after his death. Robert and Grace had 5 children, all of whom grew up in the Snowden home before going on to create their own families. Under Sally's supervision, the 30-cabin Snowden home developed and became a place for weddings, reunions, and other events. She returned there to pick up the reins. This change signaled the house's slow transformation into a bed and breakfast, a dream that Sally's daughter, Martha McKay, would eventually completely achieve. However, tragedy still struck, despite their wealth and prominence in the town. Sally Snowden McKay was in her mid-70s in 1996. She was visiting one of her Horseshoe Lake properties one summer morning in September with her 52-year-old nephew, Memphis blues guitarist Joseph Lee Baker. Joseph was a well-known and adored figure in the local music scene, frequently performing at local venues and even at the Memphis Country Blues Festival. He lived on the lake with his wife and 3 kids and taught at the local high school. However, on that summer morning, a violent crime would be committed against the seemingly untouchable family, shocking everyone. Sally and Joseph were staying at a property a few houses down from the Snowden residence when 16-year-old Travis Lewis broke in, most likely in an effort to rob someone because he believed no one was there. Travis wasn't just any intruder. His grandparents actually rented their house from the McKays, and his mother Gladys was a housekeeper at the Snowden residence. Joseph had previously taught Travis English in high school. The young teen had a criminal record, including an assault conviction, and was acquainted with the family and their customs. Travis saw a chance to get in, but when he saw Sally and Joseph inside the house, everything went horribly wrong. In a desperate attempt to hide his tracks, Travis shot them both. He then set the house on fire and attempted to flee in Sally's car, but that didn't work out either. Travis crashed and flipped the car into a ditch about a mile from the house, leaving it in ruins and abandoned. Despite hitting his head on the windshield, he was still caught on foot. Soon after the murder, neighbors found Sally's crash and abandoned car, and police began searching for the suspect who fit the salient description. Meanwhile, the LW of the two prominent family members sent shockwaves through the community. Firefighters were called to the scene almost immediately after the fire had engulfed the house. Once the fire was contained, they found the bodies of Sally and Joseph, whose autopsy reports would later reveal that they were both shot and killed before the fire was started. Not only had a violent crime claimed 2 lives, but the location was so deeply entwined with the families and the city's history that it didn't take long for authorities to track down Travis. His fingerprints were discovered at the scene, and when he was questioned, he admitted to being at the estate, but said he had an accomplice who actually shot Sally and Joseph. However, this story didn't hold up. In order to avoid trial, he accepted a plea deal that resulted in him being sentenced to 28 A2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 70% of his time. The person he named had an unquestionable alibi. The evidence pointed to Travis alone, and there was no evidence of anyone else being involved. The prosecution tried Travis as an adult, given that the case had already gained a cult-like following, because to Joseph's fame on the blue scene, the McKay family was content with the plea agreement rather than endure the emotional toll of a trial. It appeared that justice had been done, but Travis's sentence would not mark the end. One of Sally's sisters, Edith Snowden Dewey, took over the family company after Sally and Joseph were murdered, although she passed away in 2004 just before that. It was time to give the reins to Sally's daughter, Martha McKay, who was born into the Snowden family. After grieving the death of her mother at the hands of Travis and living on the West Coast for years, Martha returned to Horseshoe Lake to purchase the Snowden house from her family, which was only a few doors down from the scene of her mother's murder 8 years prior. She painstakingly renovated the house, turning it into an elegant, opulent bed and breakfast and wedding venue renowned for her charisma. The Lady of the Lake was the moniker given to Martha. The Snowden house became well known for its luxurious holiday rentals and a well-liked meeting spot for socialites, business people, and artists. Under Martha's leadership, Lights rose to prominence as one of Memphis's most popular event spaces, particularly for weddings. In a 2015 Memphis Magazine interview, "I felt like royalty with the big house and servants. Everything was fresh from the garden, fresh eggs, and we even had a peach orchard we swam every day," Martha said in her reflection on her upbringing at Horseshoe Lake, calling it nothing short of spectacular. For those who knew her, it was no surprise that Martha loved entertaining at the estate and became a well-liked figure in the neighborhood. Many people characterized her as a kind and compassionate person who truly cared for others, and it wasn't just talk that made Martha work hard to make sure her actions reflected her values. She became deeply interested in Buddhism and eventually embraced the practice herself, focusing on its teachings of forgiveness and compassion as part of her personal growth. She was determined that her forgiveness would be sincere, so much so that even though her mother and cousin were. Martha began writing letters to Travis while he was incarcerated in 1996 in an attempt to forgive him. Despite her family's disapproval, she even paid him frequent visits in an effort to better understand the young man who had killed her mother. She felt that someone else was at least partially responsible, but eventually she came to believe that Travis's actions were those of a scared, misguided boy rather than a cold-blooded killer. After spending more than 20 years in prison for 70% of his term, she began to trust him because she thought he had changed in 2018. Martha was there when 38-year-old Travis Lewis was up for parole. Unlike every other member of her family, she had been an outspoken advocate for his early release. And even though it was shocking to everyone, she went above and beyond by forgiving her mother's killer and making friends with the man she felt should be hers. When Travis was released, Martha offered him a job as a groundskeeper at the Snowden house, where he would work alongside his mother Gladys, who was still employed as a housekeeper. What most people would think? The arrangement appeared to be going well at first, even though it was the ultimate test of forgiveness for most observers, including many family members. Travis kept a low profile, and Martha thought she was helping him get back on his feet and play a significant role in his rehabilitation. However, that didn't last long, as Travis's behavior started to change noticeably. His mother, Gladys, warned Martha to be cautious, telling her that he was reverting to his old ways. Her fears were soon confirmed when she discovered that Travis had resumed stealing. At that time, Martha had sold one of the estate's ostentatious chandeliers for $14,000 in cash. She concealed the money inside the home in an envelope, but it suddenly vanished inexplicably from her journal. Martha said that she felt in her heart that Travis was to blame, since no one else could have accepted it. Gladys's warning merely served to confirm suspicions, because there was nothing else to do. Realizing that she could not let Travis stay in her life, despite her best attempts to forgive and assist in his rehabilitation, Martha made the decision to dismiss him and prohibit him from the Snowden residence. This choice would ultimately result in the tragic and ironic events of March 25, 2020, when Martha sounded a silent alarm from inside the historic estate that morning. 2 police officers were sent to the Snowden house. When they arrived, they discovered that the back door was wide open. They went inside to investigate and discovered Martha's body at the top of the stairs. Travis Lewis, the same man found guilty of killing her mother and cousin more than 20 years prior, had stabbed and bludgeoned her. Officers on the scene saw someone fleeing from a second-story window and making a run for a car, but the suspect drove into a patch of mud, trapping the car. The escape attempt was uncanny, reminiscent of the previous murders. Officers witnessed Travis abandon the car and run toward a nearby lake, but they never saw him come up. Inside the Snowden residence, they discovered a cloth bag containing goods, laying on a chair close to Martha's body, as if it were waiting to be taken. Law enforcement called in teams with sonar equipment to search the lake, and they found the lifeless body of Travis Lewis. An autopsy revealed that Travis Lewis had a combination of drugs in his system. Police concluded that Travis intended to steal the valuables, but it was unclear whether his original plan had been to break into the house and kill Martha in the process. This made others wonder about his mental state, and if he drowned because he was drunk or because he had planned to do so. The community was shocked that a killer could return decades later and exact the same brutal fate on the forgiving daughter of the person he first murdered. The family was left both devastated and in disbelief, despite their repeated warnings to Martha to stay away from her mother's killer. Travis Lewis's fate was sealed when they pulled his lifeless body from the water. The man Martha McKay had forgiven for killing the person she loved the most and selflessly rallied to help him turn his life around was dead, and so was Martha. They continued to lament the passing of their devoted, forgiving family member. Joseph Baker's grandson, Martha's cousin, told the reporters how heartbreaking it is, saying it feels like a horrible dream, like we're back here again. I'm just so sad that this is how things ended for her. Without Travis Lewis, there would have been no trial, no verdict, no courtroom justice, and Martha's family would have had no last chance to learn every detail of what had happened that morning. Instead, they were left with the bittersweet knowledge that Martha had upheld her principles of forgiveness in the face of unfathomable hardships. How do you feel about this case? Martha showed a degree of compassion and forgiveness that many of us could never have imagined. But was she truly too forgiving? Or was this a tragic event that no one could have predicted? If you think you could have forgiven Travis and let him into your home, please leave your thoughts in the comments section below. If you think we handled this case well, please hit like and subscribe so you can watch our videos as soon as they are released.